Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and also marketing manager here at Cup of Hemlock, Mackenzie. And tonight, we are going to be talking about one of Shakespeare's most controversial plays of the canon, one that has garnered much criticism and analysis, and it is the production of Taming of the Shrew from 2017, directed by Chris Abraham and starring Ben Carlson as Petruchio and Deborah Hay as Katherine. So tonight we are joined by a wonderful panel from across North America. We are first off joined by my friend from Stratford Shakespeare School, Mariana Gales. Hello!
Hello! So happy to be here.
You as well, Mariana. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I met Mac doing summer Shakespeare school at the Stratford Festival and have only actually been there a couple of times, but it's always been a treasured place in my heart. I am now pursuing my MFA at the Juilliard School in New York City, where I was born and raised. And in my cup, I have Jack Daniel's orange juice and a bit of lemon. Because we don't have bitters, and that's what I have.
I love that.
And a stainless steel straw.
Perfect, environmentally friendly, as we all should be doing now. I see no reason why we should see any more paper straws. Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, so next up, we have Monique Danielle. Hello!
Hello! I'm really excited to be here. Little about me. I'm originally from Southern Alberta. I moved to Toronto in 2016 to go to school at York University. I did my theatre degree there, and have been living and working in Toronto ever since, because that's where Canadian theatre is at. And then, so Will and I actually went to school together at York. We're in a couple classes together, and then we reunited recently at a spur-of-the-moment Shakespeare collective reading of Shakespeare, where we read from the first folio, which is always fun.
Oh, yes.
Oh, and in my cup, English style is tea from Earl Grey.
Perfect. I love that. Very British, very English, which is perfect for what we're talking about. Right. And we have our wonderful artistic director here at Cup of Hemlock, the man who spearheads all these projects, who gave the okay for us to do this entire series to begin with, Mr. William R. Bartley. Hello, Will.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say it's easy to let you guys go ahead and do something like this project if it means that I don't really have to organize a lot of it. So you and Ryan have been doing a great job organizing all of this.
Thank you.
So I think most of the notes have been covered by our other panelists. But like Max said, artistic director of Cup of Hemlock Theatre, went to classes with Monique back at York University and reconnected with the Spur of the Moment Shakespeare Collective. In my mug, actually, funny enough, Mariana, is I have Jack Daniel's as well. I am also using a reusable straw. Just the only difference is I have iced coffee.
Delightful.
Perfect. Wonderful. And in my cup tonight, I have Raspberry Crystal Light to go with the red themes from the play, as well as I put all the other reds in on the outfit, too. So, red is the color of the night. So, yes. And also Shakespeare, the pocket watch is always sitting, keeping our time. So,
Delightful.
You're
sitting, my laptop is on a complete works right now, actually.
Oh, perfect. Even more like Shakespearean vibes are going to be into our discussion tonight. I love it. Well, why don't we dive into this sucker of a play, because there's much to discuss. And as we start off with these panels, our first question always is, which character is best performed in this particular production? Monique, I saw your eyes just kind of for a minute. So why don't you kick us off tonight?
Which character is best performed? I have to say the one that entertained me the most is the one I think is best performed, and that is the one that was Gordon Miller, who plays Biandello?
Biandello? On my list too.
Just delightful. I did love Tom Rooney as Tranio, was fantastic. Acting all around was great, but those were some highlights for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, actually Tom Rooney as Tranio and Gordon S. Miller as, I don't know, how do we sound like saying his name? Biandello?
Biandello?
Biandello. It's all very Italian. Biandello, as well. I mean, for me, I totally agree with you. Like, they were wonderful. They were very entertaining on stage. They had great comedic timing with each other, like the little guitar riffs that they were doing. Where like Tom Rudy would try and do something, and then Biandello would totally overshadow him, and just the little looks they would give each other. Like, it was a wonderful comedic duo. I have to say, I think this has been Tom Rooney's favorite part we've seen him in this entire series, because we've seen him in Hamlet, we've seen him in Coriolanus, we saw him in what else was it? He's been in a few other ones, but those are the two I have coming off the top of my head. But I think this has been my favorite. Love's Labours. He was in Love's Labours, so he's been in a few, but I think this has been my favorite of his. He had a great way of working with the text. So like this very complicated plot of playing different people, like you're going from a play within a play, and then you're changing characters right off the top. Like, he made that very clear to the audience about what was going on, and trying to keeping that show moving along. So I have to agree with you, Mike, that they were absolutely wonderful together on stage. Mariana, how about you?
Well, I'm just a huge fan of Ben Carlson. I think he has a way of making the language so completely his own, but without layering anything else on it, and just almost stripping it bare and just letting it speak for itself. He plays the language and the language plays him. And I know that's not necessarily answering that was my favorite performance, just in terms of what I enjoy.
That's exactly
what actors do. And so I'm just always so, as someone who's trying to study this, just looking to those kinds of performances to see how do you take language and own it and make it contemporary without removing the muscle and the vigorous density that is Shakespeare. So I always love watching him do that.
Well said. I mean, Ben Carlson was wonderful. I mean, it's very easy to play on Petruchio as a straight out, not villain, but as the antagonist of the story, particularly when we get into what happens between him and Kate after they get married. That can come across as very evil and just not appealing to an audience. But he really did find the humanity that kind of lies underneath Petruchio. So I do agree with you. I sincerely enjoyed watching his facial reactions and little moments he had there. And then also like the fact that he got to sing a little bit of Kiss Me Kate as he lay on a table. I was like, ha, well done, Chris Abraham, tying in that musical reference there. I was very happy with that little.
I mean, he gets laughs out of doing like the tiniest thing, and I'm jealous.
He is wonderful, and it was nice seeing him not do his usual, I don't want to say shtick, but he usually plays kind of the Festes or the keep forgetting his name, but the one in Time of Athens, that's kind of like the philosopher, kind of nihilist, kind of curmudgeon-y type characters that kind of are very academic and kind of are very kind of, I don't want to say snooty, but kind of have that kind of way of looking down at the world. And this time he wasn't doing that. It was much more grounded. It wasn't so. I don't know what the best.
For me, it was almost like watching an older version of Bassanio from Merchant of Venice. It was this sweet kind of rustic underdog going above his station to try and woo somebody. I mean, we'll get to more of like the political insinuations of some of the piece later on, but for sure, like I actually agree with you a lot, Mariana, about like Ben Carlson's performance. I think out of all the performances I've seen from Shakespeare or from Stratford lately, his was one of the most elevated in terms of the text and the handling of the text. It was very clear his intentions behind every piece, and he definitely did bring it into that more modern understanding. But I wanted to give kudos to the director, because for me, my favorite part of the piece was movement. Like, my goodness, the movement from Stratford's showings like this season have not been so strong as in this play. Like for me, the standout moment, of course, is Tarnio, played by Tom Rooney, when they're doing the musical backing with the lute, and he's doing the like very slow, gradual walk and the quick dip. Like the comedic timing of the movement in this piece for me just drove home the tempo, which was just masterful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said, Will. And actually, that leads us right into our next question, which is, what was your favorite production or design element of the piece? So that is perfect. Mariana, why don't you kick us off on this one? What was your favorite design or production element that you watched?
Sure. I mean, Stratford's production values are so unbelievably rich and high. And I mean, the costuming was insane from the beginning. I mean, I'm not really sure what bucket this falls into in terms of breaking down the different components, but to see them do the induction scene, the actual framing device,
Yes.
which is so often cut, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot later,
Oh.
was very surprising and exciting.
Mhm.
And I have thoughts about it later, but it was really exciting to just see them all sort of take the stage and think about it and look, here are the costumes and here are the things. Like I thought the first 20 minutes was breathtaking in terms of pace and handling, and so much of that was costuming, because we're doing not only the beginning of the play, which was in 21st century, we are actors and we're exposing the artifice and we're breaking the fourth wall, we're doing all of that, to okay, we're going to set up this guy as the Lord and we're going to do that, and everyone's crossing. So there were like 3 different frames happening all at the beginning, and that was done so quickly and effectively and seamlessly through costuming.
Well done. Nice.
Fun.
I like that. Monique, how about you?
Agree in that, like, Stratford's production values are always incredible. Like, it's so cool to see theater done at that level. My favorite, I would have to say, is probably the incorporation and the use of music and the specific instruments that they use. Even like in terms of like comedy, as kind of Will said in the one bit where like they're playing the lute or playing something and the Tom Rooney can't speak, or like it's in the background, or it was used for so many things, for setting, for transition, for humor. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really fun element to the production.
Yeah, the music was, we've seen a few productions now where music has become quite useful. Like we saw that in Love's Labors. They had a wonderful bit of music, very similar. I think it could have been the same band, actually, because I think this is from the same season.
There was The Tempest as well, with their grand musical number.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that Juno number. Whew. We went on ad nauseum about that. There's a whole deleted scene I took out of that episode. We went on for a very long time about that darn Juno scene. A scene that shouldn't get that much attention, but it did. Still shout out to Ulysses Peacock in that peacock chariot. It was wonderful. But yeah, the music throughout was wonderfully kind of, it came in, it was very cinematic, where it kind of would drift in at certain key moments where you needed a little, like when we finally have that moment where Kate and Petruchio are out, and he's saying, well, the sun is the moon, and you can see her finally kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but she's finally kind of working, not even working, like she's, I don't want to say acquiescing, but it's that, it's that moment where they finally, it's just a very key moment where you see her changing, and kind of going with Petruchio's ideology of this moment. It's a very complicated two people have. Trying to do this in 2020. Whew.
And I think if it's okay, I'll just piggyback from there.
Yes, please.
Honestly, when the first song of this show started, I kind of had a similar reaction that I've had in other reviews that we've done, Mac, where I was like, oh, here comes the music again. The little bit of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Extravagance. Like, it's just that extra little bit that's like, do we really need that? But then as the show went on, this is the first time I've seen a Stratford production that heavily incorporated music that I was kind of happy with. I agree with you. Like, I think the music came up at the right moments. It was done more for the sake of the comedy and for the fun of the piece and the flow and the tempo, as where in previous plays that we've seen from Stratford, a lot of the musical sections feel more like a segue away from the show, almost like soliloquies might have been used for back in Elizabethan England, as kind of that little breakaway from the current, like, progressing of the plot. But this time it felt more fitting to the piece, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that has to do with the tempo of the piece that the director and the actors brought into it that made it work so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say my favorite element is something we haven't really talked about yet, but it was the stage combat. I thought it was wonderful. Like, just, and in fact they balanced. In fact they gave the both men and the women a lot of fun stage combat to do with each other, whether it was slamming each other's heads into poles, tables, slaps. Like it was this kind of great bit of physical comedy that they were adding into the story. Like, I think my favorite moment was when it was Petruchio and Katherine during their first meeting, and ultimately it ends up with Katherine upside down, her legs wrapped around Petruchio's shoulders and neck, and it's right before the father comes and gives the approval for the wedding. But you got Ben Carlson kind of going one way, Deborah Hay as Katherine going the other way, and it's just this wonderful mesh of physical comedy that they brought into this story, which is great because it was accenting the text as well. Like, it wasn't used to overshadow the text. Like whenever Katherine slaps Petruchio, it was a moment where that text gave that moment to have that moment happen, or if it was like climbing on top of Petruchio or Petruchio doing something to Katherine, it was all built in and around the text as well. So Torres Abraham did a very good job with the fight director of incorporating this wonderful bit of physical comedy for this piece as well. So yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Will, why don't you kick us off on what was the weakest part of the production?
Oh boy. So the conversation we had earlier really didn't stick, eh? As many people watching this who have seen our other reviews know, it's my biggest complaint with Stratford, and it seems to be a running one, is like the lighting again. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess for me, the real trouble comes in with the fact that Macbeth was so powerful with the lighting and so suffocating of a force. Like, literally, like, the shroud of death was present within Macbeth the entire time because of the lighting surrounding the entire stage. But then these last few performances we've been watching, like, the lighting doesn't change. It's very static. There's no flow to it, and so everything just feels very still and calm if the actors aren't moving on stage. It feels like a portrait on stage, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the lighting needs to have movements within it. And I just felt that, again, there were some, obviously, I'm not saying there were no movements within the lighting, but moreover, it was very still most of the time, and it just kind of lost me a bit.
Can I ask a question about that?
Mm-hmm.
Because you obviously are so much more intimately familiar with the Stratford stages, and I'm curious because that was done on the main stage.
Correct, at the festival, yeah.
I'm wondering. Oh, right, the Festival Theatre. Oh my God, sorry, I love it there. I miss it so much. I miss theater. Okay, but how much of that do you think has to do with just the fact that the playing space is so big, and with such a big cast, with the Elizabethan-ish setting? How much of that is like trying to be globe naturalish? Like we have a big space,
Yeah.
we have a lot of people in the space, people are moving all the time. How much of that? I genuinely don't. I don't know.
And you know what? It's a totally fair question too. And if it's going for the kind of similarity and making a facsimile of the Globe Theatre, then I think they're hitting their mark on that front, if that's the goal. But for me, coming from a performance, for instance, The Tempest as well had really dynamic and fun lighting through a lot of the piece as well. And so I'm just comparing it to the previous productions they did and looking at it now, and I'm kind of asking myself, is like, why are we going from such elaborate focus on the lighting between a comedy and a tragedy? Because if it was just that it was a tragedy and that's what they wanted to elevate in that piece, then great. But seeing it in both a comedy and a tragedy and how well it worked and the talented people they have behind that as well on some of their shows, for me, it just becomes a point of fixation now that I've seen like all of the shows going through this season of being like, where is the lighting? Why isn't it's just, and again, it's not that it's bad, but by any means, it's just that it's not to the same level of excellence and mastery that we've seen from like Macbeth and The Tempest. And I guess that's why I'm disappointed. And I keep bringing it up and I feel bad every time I do.
No, it's a very valid thing. A lot of times lighting, I don't want to say lighting ever gets forgotten, but I feel like a lot of times the lighting can kind of be one of the last elements that get thought of by the creative team, and because of that, a lot of times it's just like wash, like let's just get it there. And I think also because the festival usually plays host to 4 different productions in a season, a lot of times it's you only got this many light plots you can personally do, and then the rest of the time we got to add in other people, and we got to make it as universal of a lighting thing as too, because each show that goes in piles onto the last lighting grid that's already being created. So I think there are a lot of times there's a lot of, I don't know, I've never worked at Stratford, I've never done the lighting at Stratford, but I got a feeling it's a lot of make sure your lighting is as universal as possible. So you don't want to do too many gobos, too many things where like the next production has to work around you versus working with you. I don't know. That's just something I could thought of with the lighting, where like that could be a reason why some, like, depending on where the show falls within the four shows of the theater, where it falls within there.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody has the answer to this, because I'm pretty sure they have that kind of horseshoe lighting grid, and then there's like 3 or 4 rings of that grid style coming out from the main one.
Yeah, so basically there's the main lighting grid that is kind of like, you're right, it is very horseshoe, but you can't go inside the horseshoe too. Mm-hmm. But they don't really like to, because there also is where the trapdoor drop, where if like they're gonna have petals or leaves fall from the top, that's where it will come from. So yes, it is horseshoe, and then it rounds out with 3 more levels from there. And then like during each of the shows, if a gobo does need to be inserted, they'll insert during the changeover. So once again, it's that changeover that they're watching for the lighting too, where they don't want to do too much to it and try and keep it as universal. But I don't know. I agree with you. I mean, the lighting wasn't my favorite part, but I have to say, I think my least favorite part was the costume. I'm sorry, Mariana. I know they're beautiful. Like, I've seen that dress. I mean, they really highlighted that wedding dress. Like, they had it in the glass cases now ever since they produced it. They've had the videos about how they made it. Like, it's been a really kind of big look at what we make, which just means, I mean, don't get me wrong, the costumes are beautiful. They just felt very general. And we talked about this in our R&J episode we just did last week, where they also went for the Elizabethan proctorish. Wrong. Like, I love Elizabethan costuming. It's just when I get to Stratford and it's like Tom Rudy comes in, the first thing he says is, "After 8 seasons at Stratford, I'm finally wearing pumpkin pants." And I'm like, oh, here we go. Pumpkin pants, and so traditional. And I just go, there's so many other creative choices you can go with setting this play, that you go pumpkin pants and ruffs and all that classical look. And after a while, it just kind of goes, oh, general. Like, it's that general look to it. Like you could easily take out Shrew and you could stage Merchant, R&J, Much Ado, any other Shakespearean play can fit within that Elizabethan, maybe not Caesar and a few other the Greeks and Roman plays that we kind of go for, but like I feel like those costumes are very general, that pumpkin pants and outfits. Will, I see you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was wondering if I could quickly cut back in, because hearing what Mariana had to say about the lighting being quite similar to the Globe in terms of what you might see there, and then Mac talking about the traditional costumes, like I am getting the sense, and also just the flow and the tempo of the piece as well, maybe they were going for more of that very traditional feel of what you might have seen during, the Elizabethan era, or what you might have seen in the Globe nowadays if they were to put on that performance. But yeah, I guess I kind of want to rescind my lighting comment now that I've thought about it a little bit more, and I appreciate the feedback.
We've converted Will.
Oh no.
It's good.
Which is true. I mean, this came across as very traditional. I just went, of all the costumes, we couldn't have done something a little bit more elaborate than pumpkin pants and ruffs. But, I mean, they're still beautiful to look at. Don't get me wrong. The Stratford Festival still creates beautiful costumes, even when they are just Elizabethan wear. But, I mean, it's still beautiful. For me, I just went, of all the elements, that was just when I was like, meh. Everything else just was everything else was just wonderful. So, yeah. Monique, what do you think? What's your weakest element of the production?
When I like knew I was going to be on this panel, and I kind of was like, oh, I should look and see like who the creative team was and stuff, and look. And when I saw that they that they had a male director for a very problematic sexist play, I was like, that seems like such a no-brainer decision to me, that you wouldn't do that. And that's nothing against Chris Abraham's direction. I don't think he directed it poorly, but to me, I think the worst part of it was that it was like, or the weakest part, sorry, was that they chose to do it Elizabethan, and it was very much, this is Taming of the Shrew on stage. It was problematic in a lot of ways for me, and particularly as a woman watching it, I was like, there were so many times when I was like, oh, and I just so I think that I just, if you're gonna do Taming of the Shrew these days and you're not gonna change the script, I think you should start with at least a female director, or especially because there was only basically 3 women who had any speaking roles, because there was no gender swapping. So it was just a very male-centric play. And I think I don't know, maybe that was the plan, was to just lean into the problematic and just acknowledge it or what. But to me, I think it was it added to the unsuccess of the play for me.
Oh, well said. Well said. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Trying to be diplomatic.
You know what? I do agree with you though too. Is like there is a bit of a troubled history, obviously, with Stratford and representation, diversity on stage and behind the stage too, on the creative team side of things. And they probably should have made a little bit more of that extra step to do respect to the piece and to the performers in the piece as well. I definitely have a lot more notes as this goes on about that exact element, as I'm sure most of us do, with this being such a politically, what's the word I'm looking for, inclined play, being diplomatic as well. But the address at the start kind of felt like, when they, like, the actors were talking to the audience, kind of felt like they were maybe trying to make an address towards the politicized elements of the piece. But I don't think it was enough. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Mariana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, on that, the opening, what I was thinking about was, okay, so we're going to be talking about, literally courtship as performance. These rituals are socially constructed and we are enacting them in such a way. And I guess I wondered if, once it got going, if that was a bit of a dodge or a cheat, because you can acknowledge all that in the beginning, but if it doesn't play through, then I wonder what it was doing. And especially, if you're going to have, right, Taming of the Shrew, as so many people don't know, is already a play within a play, where you have the whole story of Kate and Petruchio being supposedly performed for this drunk guy. And so this production put another frame on top of that of, we're going to make a joke of this boisterous men's rights audience member and have him watch it, who ends up being Petruchio. But to not revisit it at all at the end, if you're gonna because you get so caught up in the story and it's so funny and there's slapstick and the performances are amazing and they're larger than life and there's all of these things, and then at the end they walk off and you sort of think, oh right, Taming of the Shrew, great, so much fun. But they started with, this is performance, this is passed down, this is constructed, this is put on. And I don't know how they could have brought it back, because then I think to what you were saying, Monique, one of the tricky things about the play, among so many, is with Catherine's last speech, if she means it, then that's saying something. But if she doesn't mean it at all, why does she say it? And I'm not saying that we have to go, well, okay, in Shakespearean, in Elizabethan drama, there's no, everyone means what they say, and that's why the language is the language of thought, and it's why we continue to study it, even though there are so many other great playwrights across time and space. So I'm not saying like everyone has to mean what they mean and we can never have subtext, let's just ignore psychological drama like ever happened, right? We can't do that, because we're watching these in the 21st century. We have to acknowledge where we are. But I feel similarly unsatisfied when someone does a production of Taming of the Shrew and they have Kate sort of wink at the end, like, I didn't mean it. Because then you're not dealing with what she's saying. And it just, again, to your point about having a female director, 100%. And also that's not always a guarantee that it's going to be in any way revisionist or sophisticated or integrated in terms of vision. For example, I love Phillida Lloyd. I love Phillida Lloyd. We have said that. I saw her I saw the all-female production of Taming of the Shrew that she did at Shakespeare in the Park a few years ago. And amazing performances. Yes, Janet McTeer, like, I love it 100%. Please do that for me all day, every day. But at the end, it was very much, and I didn't mean it. And I just sort of thought, okay, well, but you don't, I personally, I don't feel like you get to do that. And so,
it's like waking up and it was all a dream kind of thing. It's a cheat.
Right. And if you're gonna, but of course, like, you know, these are texts that you can interpret 100 different ways, and you can set in all 100 blah blah blah. So I don't know how you resolve the how can she mean it issue without making her mean it and having us sit with that, which is troubling. Or bringing back and this was a performance, and how did it make you feel? And I also have to say, it felt, I know I'm going on for a while now, but
no, please, this is wonderful. I'm loving this. But
it is, right, especially watching this production now at this moment in 2020, even the beginning brilliant patter that Ben Carlson was doing as the disguised patron. At some point he said, "I matter." And that's, hearing that come from what seemed to be a very conservative, older, white man interrupting a performance in a theater saying, "I matter, I matter," in this time of the necessary and overdue resurgence of Black Lives Matter across the US, across the world, everywhere. That sounds very different. Or I should say, it sounds different to me hearing it now. I'm sure it sounded problematic to many, and there's an awakening happening all over. Another thing that I was thinking of in terms of watching the roundtable of, I think, Black artists and other artists of color at Stratford, just and again, and I'm saying this from my position as a white woman in the US, and so of course my perspective is very narrowed, and I can only try to learn. But even seeing Kate, you know, Bianca being played by a Black actor, and having Kate cut her hair and what that means. Of course, like, you know, I wasn't in the rehearsal room. I don't know what those conversations were like. I would never presume to speak for anyone as to how those conversations or those rehearsals went down. But I'm sitting here and I'm watching it, and that struck something in me.
I very much agree. When that happened, I think I gasped out loud. It was a lot.
Yeah. Wonderful. No. This was wonderful. And we're gonna dive more into this type of topic momentarily. But we have one more question to get through before we get into the text and the play itself.
Sorry.
No, this is great. You kicked us off in a wonderful direction. I think it really kind of helps lead us into our last question of, did this production hit the mark, and is it worth the watching? So, who wants to start this one? Because I feel we're all kind of interested. Will, go.
I can go. If that's okay with everybody. And I'm elected myself to go first because I have a bit more of an ambiguous answer to this, which is, it's hard to say really from my point of view. Like, there's so much, as we just discussed, on the political end that I couldn't sit through. Like, my stomach was turning and twisting at a lot of different points, just being like, it just doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel right. There's a lot of I think unintentional political associations that they made just through the casting choices, through the director choice, through the staging, through the character dynamics, the choice of certain elements of text being elevated, the staging of Katherine herself and the direction of Katherine. Like, I mean, I'm going to get into this in a little bit, but like, Katherine as a character from Taming of the Shrew really deserves to be staged and directed in a cunning and intelligent way. Somebody who refuses to fit in with the gender norms of her time. And I think there's a way to do that, but I know that there's a lot of textual issues with that lay into the rest of the piece, but I think that this character deserves to be put into the hands of a director who can take it and really turn it into something worth watching nowadays than what was staged that I just saw, which was kind of this like really almost like bratty, childish, immature take on Catherine, which is borderline offensive from my point of view. And then I look at the other aspects of the piece, like the pacing of the piece and the actual direction of the piece acting wise was very strong. And like for the first time, one of Stratford's comedies that I've seen on recording felt like a comedy. A lot of the comedic moments that were shared with like the musical numbers and the actual movements of the piece felt very strong. So there's, on the direction side of it, quite strong, but on the impact side of the piece, which I think is an important discussion that needs to be had with any piece that we tackle, especially classical pieces. No, like I don't think that it did hit the mark, and I think that in a lot of ways it went really far the wrong way. But that's my take on it, for what it's worth.
Monique, I see you nodding along with Will. What are your thoughts?
I agree in so many ways. Like, yes, I Will said a lot of the things that I thought when I watched it and when I was thinking it. So overall, as a production, did it hit the mark? In my opinion, no. Is it worth watching? In my opinion, no. I don't think this particular production said anything new about the play that hasn't been said in a staging before. And I think it only added to the problematic stereotypes of women and men, even. Like, the men were so gross in this play, like, and men aren't like that. So I personally think it didn't have anything. It's nothing new. So why bother? Like, other than to have, like, there are other filmed versions of Taming of the Shrew. So why did there need to be another one? That says nothing new. In my opinion, I don't think it hit it. I think one of the things they tried to do, and kind of like in talking about how Catherine was directed, is like, they almost tried to villainize her and made it like, oh yeah, she's this awful person. She's so awful. But it's like, because they said it in Elizabethan England, she has zero power. She's a woman with no power. So how can we then be like, oh, thank goodness you tamed that shrew, when it's like in order to see her as a villain that deserves taming, she has to have power, and you can't do that in Elizabethan England. Like I think that's what they were trying to do. I don't think it was successful.
Well said.
Thanks.
Mariana, thoughts?
I feel so conflicted because, and I know that, again, sort of alluding to the historical moment we find ourselves in, feeling conflicted is not always as productive as it should be. But mainly my takeaway was, God, to see people telling a story on stage for people, and that was worth it for me. I haven't just because of personal schedule things, haven't been able to watch as much theater live stream or whatever it is, like recorded versions of stage productions over the past couple of months as I would have liked to. And so when I am able to sort of sit down and watch something, I just sort of think, wow, what an insane form. Like, that people come together and do this thing. And yeah, over time, it's taken all these different shapes depending on the people in the room and the people who aren't in the room and all of that. But still, there's that thing. And so which doesn't answer your question at all which is about the production specifically. I'm going like meta, like, what is drama? You know, that's where I'm at right now. Sorry. So that's sort of where my mind goes, but I agree. Maybe not as much depth as one would hope in the mining of this particular text. As someone in process for acting, it's always, for depending on who you are, like, so I enjoy looking at it from sort of a technician's point of view, right? I'm like trying to see how all the pieces work together, as are we all. But so, sure, yeah, there are other versions that maybe one could watch. And this play now, who knows? I mean, in a funny way, I was thinking a lot about the, I don't know where the full version is, but there's a documentary about the Meryl Streep, Raul Julia production, and that was in Central Park in the 80s, I want to say. And it's so amazing hearing Meryl Streep talk about Catherine and saying, isn't that amazing that she says, like, you are my husband and I worship you, honor you, obey you. Isn't that amazing as a way of actualizing self through relationship? But then to think about it, this is in the 80s, like very second wave feminism, like that would be a radical way of looking at this text. Not that Kate submits, but that Kate chooses, isn't tamed, but takes it on. So this production maybe doesn't do that.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I like, for me, and like, I can acknowledge the interesting philosophical scope of the like that mentality of like self-actualization through a romantic partner, but like it's such an antiquated idea that originated from romanticism, and so like there's a lot of problematic implications of that nowadays when we look at what self-identity is, right? Like I don't know, and I guess that's where my stomach gets turned in a knot about the whole thing.
Right. I mean, there are so many, as many people who say we should never do Taming of the Shrew ever again. There are people who say we should never do Merchant of Venice ever again. We should never do,
Yeah.
I mean, they're of the Shakespeare trafficking and stereotype and issue. Does this need to be staged ever? I don't know.
We're gonna get into that in a hot second.
Sorry, I keep it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're ahead of your time. Revolutionary.
Usually I base this answer to this question about did it hit the mark, is it worth the watch, off of a lot of different things. Like Stratford usually gives a concept creative discussion they do with the director and usually another member of the creative team where they talk about their creative concepts behind it. There's usually a cast reunion discussion that they do. And then there also is usually a pre-show chat with a few of the different cast members before they do the airing. And that was not available this time. For some reason, Stratford just chose not to do any of that for this particular episode, which I really why. I think this is the episode that requires that most of all, that we have to, there should be a discussion around this. So the fact I didn't have that to lean on to be like, where were you trying to go and did you actually hit it? So based on what I've seen alone, I think overall it's a traditional adaptation of this. So, I mean, if you're looking to show traditional Taming of the Shrew, this is a production I'm sure you could show people. I think there are better productions to show people. I mean, we all know the great adaptation they did of this. What was it? The 12 Things I Hate About You with Heath Ledger. I mean, that's still one of my favorite modern day Shakespearean adaptations of the story, where it's wonderful. So I think there's a lot of other ways you can go about looking at this story. I think the one reason why I would show to people is just because of Ben and Deborah, because they are a married couple in real life. So they have that wonderful kind of really good chemistry with each other that I enjoyed watching, like particularly in that first scene where they meet each other and they're kind of just trading barbs with each other. I really enjoyed just watching this married couple work together on stage and really kind of have some fun together. So I like that was one of the reasons why I watched it for that particular reason. Overall, though, it's like, okay, like it's I don't say it's meh, but it's kind of like meh. Like it's like, do you want to? Like, sure, you could. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't, but I mean, is it the number one version I'd want to show to the world? Maybe not. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a great version that Morgan Freeman and Tracy Ullman did where they said it in the Wild West. And then Morgan Freeman plays Petruchio, and it's wonderful. Like, it's a great, there's a great documentary of them making it as well. So I highly recommend you watch that wonderful documentary that Morgan Freeman did about his experience doing this part. So
That is the first I've ever heard of that, and that sounds so interesting.
Will's face was just incredible to watch during when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
Everything about that is like, what? Okay.
wonderful. It's wonderful. It was part of a series I found on iTunes before iTunes went away, called between the lines, and it's like a celebrity will take on a different Shakespeare play and talk about and research it, Kim Cattrall did St. Cleopatra because she's played Cleopatra a few times. Morgan Freeman did Taming of the Shrew because he had done Shrew, and they kind of talk about and explore the play again, and they interview the other actors who have done the show, and and you get to see clips of it, and I've found more clips of this production, so it's wonderful. Yeah, Tracy Ullman and Morgan Freeman did a wonderful adaptation of this play, like in the late 80s, early 90s, I think they did it, like outside in Regent Park or something. But it's wonderful. So yeah, I don't think this is the first production I would show people, but I think just for the chemistry of Petruchio and Katherina, I think this was a wonderful bit of fun, just because they are a married couple, so they have that extra X factor of being really intimate and knowing each other, knowing how to play off each other well. But yeah, do we have any other final thoughts other than Will's? I still see her spitting for Morgan Freeman doing Taming of the Shrew.
Yeah, just searched up the pictures. It's as interesting as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go.
I'm always so curious because every director is different. When does the director, in collaboration with the design team and the actors, sort of finally articulate the main dramatic question that this particular production is trying to answer?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because in college I was in Taming of the Shrew as Bianca. Ooh. And it's interesting because we ended up arriving at sort of something that I think satisfied us all as storytellers in that moment, but it was very late in the process. It was sort of like week of, it was, what are we saying? And I know that with Stratford having the luxury of such a long rehearsal process, I wonder how often that was articulated. And I also wonder when this was filmed in relation, because I don't know when this was filmed in relation to the run of the season.
So a lot of times the performance is usually recorded on one of the final matinees. So it's towards the end of the summer, early fall. This was 2017 is when they did it. So this was right after both Canada and the US had some major elections of 2016, 2015. So yeah, that's when this was done. So this was when the actors had really kind of gone into their groove. They had done rehearsal, and this was now towards the end of their run. They usually try and do it toward the fall, just because that's when they can try and get some more people to come and see. Because usually in the fall, it's a lot harder to get people to come out to see a show when everybody's back to work and back to school. And so if you say, "Hey, come on, you could be part of the film," then that's an automatic kind of bit of marketing you can do there. But yeah, 2017, I think 2017 was this production. Yeah. And it was, it's usually filmed in the fall is when it's done. So
yeah, I just always sort of wonder, like, in the lifetime of a rehearsal process and in the show itself, how much the emphasis on certain parts of the narrative are changed just depending on how it reads with the audience. And I mean, the audience is part of the play.
Yeah.
Even when we're not there and we're watching a live video, right, a recording of a live performance, I mean, that audience is part of it, and where the laughs are and how the audience is responding is part of it, and is worth thinking about too, because we can look at this production and we can look at the choices and think about our experience watching it, but I'm sitting here going, okay, well, that's happening, but then what's happening in the seats too, and what are they laughing at, and how do they like it? I mean, on their feet at the end. And I wonder, that's
interesting. I was actually in the audience for the when they did Merry Wives this past fall.
Oh yeah.
And so it's really cool. And I don't know if they did this for the beginning of everything, but for Merry Wives, they definitely hoped that the audience would laugh extra hard, clap extra hard. Like, we were all very aware that it was being filmed, and we wanted to kind of give Stratford their due and make sure that so there might have been a little bit extra laughing. just knowing you're on like knowing that you're in the audience and you're like, maybe they'll get me on camera. Like I'll be watching this in Cineplex and be like, there's me.
That's my head. That's my head.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so why don't we now dive into questions about the play itself? This is where we get into some real meat and potatoes where, yeah, we're going to have some fun in here. So the first question right off the bat that we're going to tackle is this a play we should and can still perform today? Mariana, I want you to start this one.
Oh my gosh. That's so much better. I did look at the questions beforehand, so I knew this was coming, but still. I think if we're looking at, okay, Shakespeare, whoever we think Shakespeare may or may not have been, probably that guy from Stratford who blah, blah, blah. And we look at the plays that are attributed to him as documents to be considered in their time and also now, and also thinking of the centuries and centuries that, because his plays were published, mm-hmm. the ways that his language and his legacy have been used for good and for evil over time. I would say that this play should be explored. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't go so far as to say we should never stage it. That's also saying that as someone who can sort of sit in the audience and think about a lot of different questions about it and be offended and enraged and confused and questioning and all these sorts of things, and feel those deeply and viscerally and be upset. But it's worth grappling with, I think it goes back to what I was sort of saying earlier, that the two ways that I've sort of seen it contended with so often are so unsatisfying, in terms of like, we're going to give it a spin so that it makes sense, mm-hmm. or we're going to just sort of pretend it's all a dream. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in between those two is where we should live. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've lived there enough. If you think about all the things that the play is saying about misogyny, about abuse, about toxic masculinity, about all of these things, I don't think we've answered those questions enough, mm-hmm. To do away with it. That said, if it's between doing another Taming of the Shrew to try to answer those questions and a new play that looks at the same things, featuring voices and stories that have not been represented or have been historically underrepresented, like, do that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not saying Shrew is canceled.
Yeah, I like that. Shrew is not canceled. Well said. Monique, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. I think Mariana has a lot of really great points. It's funny, when I read this question, it's like, is this a play we should or can still perform? It's like, can we? Yeah, sure. Why not? There's nothing in it that you like. You can. Should we perform this play? Personally, I don't think this play should be performed as was written anymore. I just, like Mariana said, like there's so many other plays. Like there's so many other stories that can be told. Shakespeare has other great stories that can be told. So to tell it kind of as this production did, of like, this is how it was written and we're just putting it up, as like, why? Like, why put all that money and effort? There's no money for the arts in Canada, so why would we put some of it towards that? Yeah, right. Like there's like, we got no money. Like, let's make new art. Let's tell stories that haven't been told. I have a couple adaptations of this play that I would love to give it a try. So I think adaptations could be exciting, because but that's kind of how I think about the classics. Like, I am not a Shakespeare purist, and there would be a lot of people who would hate my opinion about it. But it's like, I don't think we should, like, it's 2020. Like, let's think about like what's happening today, and how we can use this play to address like issues of today. And even like the purists, it's like, well, take a play like Macbeth, the Scottish play, like, okay, it's written about a king who was king in like 1000 or whatever, but then it's got Elizabethan elements, like they're all Catholic. It's like, okay, that's not true. That's not how it would have been back in then Scotland. So why can't we put in elements of today? Like, I think that's just kind of how it's meant to be done. It's like, it's meant to be poignant and
anachronistic. It was always anachronistic.
Well, and like, I think it's really, I loved that we are talking about this today, particularly because of what has recently happened with Representative Alexandria, AOC. Sorry, say that again, Mac?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can swear on this.
You get one F-bomb. We are a PG-13.
Okay, basically, she was called a fucking bitch. And so, like, if we were to do this play today, it's like the taming of the FB. In my opinion, like, that's what that meant. That's what Shrew was. Mm-hmm. That's who she was. She was an angry woman who should have been quiet. Mm-hmm. And so I would love to talk about that in terms of this. I don't think we need to put it on stage and pretend she's a villain and just like a big meanie, and we need to show her that her behavior is too much, like, so
yeah, no. Oh, wonderful. Will, what are your thoughts?
I mean, kind of a blending of the two, to be perfectly honest. If anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge admirer of Shakespeare, the canon that Shakespeare brought forth into the world, and like a big passion of mine is to contribute to the revitalization and passion for all of Canada for Shakespearean theatre. I think it's a worthwhile form of writing to study. I mean, really, I think that's hard to deny from any standpoint. Going off of what Mariana said, though, like I love that you brought in the historical context and like the value of history with this piece. First of all, I just wanted to say that, so thank you for that. It's something that doesn't get brought up a lot on these review panels, and I think it's something that's worth discussing, because I think something that there's kind of a double-edged blade that's happened here is that I feel like Taming of the Shrew gets a little bit of a pass in a lot of people's eyes in terms of the dramatic canon because of all the other body of work that Shakespeare brought forth, as where a lot of other playwrights who maybe aren't as famous from those time periods are hard canceled because of the contents of their pieces. And so it brings up an interesting question from the historical perspective of like, why are we allowing the pass here but not in other areas, and are we doing this because who Shakespeare is / was, and beyond that too, like, should and can it still be performed today? Honestly, Monique, like, that was hilarious. Like, yeah, of course it can, but why? It's like such a I almost F-bombed. It's such a poignant question. Like, it's like, why would we do this if we're not saying something new? And I think that Taming of the Shrew, unlike some of the other plays in the classical canon, that needs to be the focus, is like, what story are we telling and why now? As where in some of the other ones you can get away a little bit with like the more purist approach to the show, but Taming of the Shrew, I feel, falls into the realm of like, you need to understand the contextualization of today. And really, if we're looking back on how plays were written then and what plays were written about and why they were written, I think Shakespeare would argue that the recontextualization of his texts in the modern day is kind of the point. Romeo and Juliet is about Catholicism and Protestantism and the clash between the two religions and faiths, and how England was struggling at that time between switching monarchs, right? Is like, if we're not acknowledging why the piece was written at the time and the contextualization of that piece then, and we're not taking the lesson that Shakespeare told us from then and applying it to now, one of our core responsibilities as modern dramatists and actors, directors, and theater makers in general is that we have a responsibility to give insights to our society and the current political systems through the theater that we stage. Sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced. Sometimes it's a little bit more on the nose. But if we're not doing that, I don't think we're doing what Shakespeare did in his time either. And really, we're failing the whole point of the historical context of these pieces if we ignore that lesson. Now, that said, and this is kind of like my final point on this, and it leads back to something I mentioned earlier, is like, I think this play should be performed nowadays. I just think it needs to fall into the right person's hands. And I don't know who that is or where they're going to come from or what background of education they're going to have. But, I really do believe that there is a way to stage Kate as a cunning and intelligent character who is really trying to push the boundaries of her gender conformity. And I would love to see a version of Kate that is more, and I'm bringing up Merchant of Venice again as a reference point, and I apologize for that because we talked about it and I brought up Bassanio earlier, but like, I'd love to see a version of Kate that is more similar to Portia or some of the other leading ladies like in Shakespeare's canon that really bring power to them, like Cleopatra as well. Like, why can't we have a version of Kate that really dominates the stage and more intellectually dominates her romantic matches that have been forced upon her? Like, I think that would be so much more exciting.
She almost seems like an early Beatrice, right? Like she's got the smart tongue, and she doesn't really want to get married, and she's like not into that. But it's almost like he wrote Taming of the Shrew, and then he was like, ooh, I need to do better. Okay, much ado about nothing.
There was Harriet Walter gave a lecture at my undergrad my first year, and it blew my mind in so many ways because she's an unbelievable actor and has so much to say. And but one of the things she said that I'd never considered, and I apologize, I'm sure this is stuff that you've thought about way longer than me, but was about Shakespeare's women. And, you know, we love Shakespeare because he gives us Beatrice, he gives us Cleopatra, he gives us Margaret, he gives us like all of these incredible, and then he gives you Octavia, and he gives you Bianca, and you're just thinking, what? But how to go back to what you were saying about the historical context, and this doesn't answer the question. I don't answer questions, I'm sorry. But how Shakespeare was writing a lot of those female roles for the boys in the company to train to become the leading men that they would be. And so for every Juliet, the Juliet would grow up to be Hamlet. The Rosalind would grow up to be Beatrice. The Kate would then grow up to be Lady M, would grow up to be Mackers. And how so many of the and this isn't to take away from the female roles that they were just sort of written for boys in training at all, but it's something to sort of consider in really exciting ways, that these roles were not warm-ups to the great leading male roles, but that they were possibly written to develop the stamina and the ability and the capacity for those young actors to be able to do the performances that they needed to do when they were grown, more adult. And so that was just something I'd never sort of thought about. And again, and right, on the one hand, it's sort of like, well, darn it, like then what does that make all of these female roles? And then on the other, it's they had to master them, because if they couldn't, they wouldn't be up to the task as men.
Can I piggyback off that?
Yeah.
Just for a second, I like that phrasing. I love that. Is like these actors who were playing Juliet would grow into being Hamlet, right? But I think in the modern day, what I would love to see happening is a little bit more of that treatment on the characters' hands. Is like, I think that these characters that are a little bit more antiquated need to grow into becoming more complex and developed characters, and that happens with the staging and the direction. Is that the point you were trying to make? I'm sorry if I glossed that.
No. I think right. I think the reductive and simplified version. Yeah. These are just stepping stones to the great male roles. And what I was saying is that what I hope it would be is that they have that inner churning complexity, and if you're not able to deal with that, then how could you possibly do anything else? Mm-hmm. And that they are their own beautiful things in their own right. But yes, sorry.
Bridget Wilson brought up a very similar point to what you just brought up, Mariana, when we were talking about Lady M, and when we had her on for Mackers as well, just about the way Lady M is done and the way she was written. She brought that up, very similar point of that this was usually a young man playing the part, and that the way they're written to kind of give these young boys chances to grow and become something else down the road, like eventually playing Mackers in a later run. But yeah, I think for me, I think actually I have very similar lines to what Monique said too, where the concept of we can perform anything we darn well want on a stage. Like, we could easily put on Showboat. Should we put on Showboat? Probably not. But can we? Yes, we can put on anything we like on a stage. The bigger question should
anything goes.
Another great, haha. Yeah, there we go. That's a two-pronged pun there. I like that. But yeah, like, should we? I err with all of you where I think it depends on the director. Like, if the director comes in with a really unique vision on how to tackle this play, then I'm all for it, because I don't think we should ever just toss a play in the trash can because it's challenging and it's complex and it challenges our societal quandaries we're going through right now. Like, I think that's what art is great for. Art is great for holding the mirror up to a society and making you think and work and look. And I think just doing the safe art or the art that makes us feel comfortable in a theater is not stuff we should keep producing. We should be producing art that makes us challenge and think, and maybe this play is probably not the perfect play for that, but at the same time it could be. I mean, we're generating a great conversation right now from this production and this play, and if there's a great story to be told, then I think we shouldn't stop it just because it challenges us. I think we should take that chance head on and do the art that challenges us, because I think that's the best way art works, is when it challenges an audience to think and to go away thinking about the work they've just seen. Like, we don't want everything to be a Marvel movie. Don't get me wrong, Marvel movies are a lot of fun. They're popcorn. Like, it's great, easy fodder for you to sit and watch, but we do want the harder stuff that makes you sit and think and leave the theater going, what did I just watch, and have that bigger conversation. Because that's
what's my role in that too, right?
Yes.
Like, I think that's the big question. Like, Howard Barker talks about that, English practitioner, incredible writer of theater, and he talks about putting his audience into states of uncomfortability with what they're witnessing on stage, and challenging them to ask themselves what their role is in this. Are they complicit by watching it, right? And that uncomfortability spawning people into action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly, and that's how I feel with Taming of the Shrew. We should all feel uncomfortable with what Petruchio does to Catherine in that ending. That is such a challenge for a director to tackle. That's why we should do it, because we should explore that and figure out, how do we do it? Because there's something in there to explore with this piece, and I think just shelving it and saying it's too challenging, it's like we just shouldn't do it. I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is work it and try and experiment. Sometimes an experiment will work, and sometimes we get a mad production like we saw that didn't quite hit the mark. But the point is to try and to work and experiment with the work and give actors a chance to work. And I think that's what this play can do, is it gives a lot of people chances to explore and really kind of get to some of these bigger questions we have about this particular play. So, yeah. All right. Any other final thoughts before we head into our next question? Because I think we have topped this question to nauseam. And I think we're going to get into even more stuff with it, where we get into, is Catherine truly tamed by the end of the play? Monique, why don't you start this one?
Sure. In terms of like the script, when it was written, I think that's the goal. At the end of the play, she's tamed. She's seen the error of her ways and how she shouldn't be shrewish, and she should be loyal to her husband. And that's the way that she'll reap the most rewards as a woman. Mm-hmm. She's not wrong. In Elizabethan England, it's like, that's kind of the best shot you had. Like, otherwise you're going to have a real shit life. Sorry,
No, that's okay.
I've maxed out on my swear words.
I said darn it earlier because I wasn't sure.
In terms of like this production or other productions, like I don't like the idea that she's tamed by the end of the play. In some of the adaptations that I would like to do, it's like, it's more that she's defeated rather than tamed. It's like she's resigned. She's like, well, and so that's kind of the Kate I read at the end of the play, is it's like the like my father hates me, my sister hates me, like my husband tortures me. The only way I'm going to have a life is if I give in. And so she's defeated at the end of the play, more so than tamed. And it's really sad to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mariana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, pretty much the same in terms of, right, maybe if you just take it face value based on the text, sure. Tamed, ready to go, on board, all of those things. So yeah, what does that mean? And right, it would be really interesting. Sometimes I think of a lot of early Shakespeare plays. Like, I mean, I think about Two Gents, where you sort of had 4 good acts, and then in the 5th act he threw everything into the blender. Just like, and I know that with Taming, the blender happens earlier, but you know, right, just sort of what it means for the actor playing Kate to have gone through that experience and then say those things. Yeah, sure. Face value, tamed. What tamed can mean can vary.
Well said. Will?
I, not to just jump on the bandwagon, but based on the text and how the play is executed, yes, Tamed. I think that there's something to be said about perhaps at some point this play ending as more of like a tragic note could be more interesting to see as well, where there is like kind of that type of people are a great deal of time throughout all of history, and especially in our current day, like shoved into these identities, right? Like based on gender, based on race, and all these different ways that people shuffle us into certain archetypes and conformities. And I think there's something to be said about maybe ending this play as on a tragic note. And Mac, you and I have actually talked about Midsummer Night's Dream, like talking about the characters, how all this mismatching of love. Like there's one character at that end of the play who's still under the spell that Puck has put forth. And like,
Dimitri.
I think there's something, Dimitri, like, I think that that's another character that deserves to be staged a little more tragically towards the end. It's like this character has been shoved into something that in his full consciousness he doesn't want to be a part of. And I really
like, what does it mean that Helena is like, he likes me, fine, I don't have to worry about why or how?
And I think there's no please, like, interrupt away. Like the insights you're bringing into this conversation are fantastic. But yeah, I really think that there's room to end this play if we're going to go with the textual advisement in a way of her being tamed, whatever that means by the end of the play, that maybe we end this on a more tragic note. It's a highlight of the wrong that we've done in history as a society and the wrongs that we continue to do, a sort of lesson, if you will. And that kind of leads back to what you're talking about, like the value historically that the play has in itself, just looking back and acknowledging, like, is this one of the most politically correct plays Shakespeare's written? No, absolutely not, far from it. But at the same time, is it important to acknowledge that that is part of who Shakespeare was at that time, and it's part of the conformity of that time too, and that is something that is at least should be acknowledged and studied and learned, to look at how far we've come and how far we still have to go as a society. I don't know. That's a complex, very ambiguous answer. I apologize.
No, trust me. I mean, my answer is really simple. It depends on the direction of the piece. Like the Taming, like technically speaking, her final monologue of like wife, love your husband, whatever. Like that totally can be taken as she is tamed. But then, as Mariana pointed out, sometimes productions end with her winking to the audience as a scapegoat way of getting around that final monologue. So I really think it depends on the direction. I mean, I think Shakespeare, text-wise, with writing for the Elizabethan time, was saying, yeah, she's tamed, and that's kind of the way she is. But I think you also can go another way, depending on how you direct the piece, on how you want to portray Kate. Like, she could be someone who is tamed as in her harder facade she's put up to the world has been brought down by Petruchio, where like she's being chastised and insulted and passed over repeatedly by her father, her sister, the suitors, and she's put the shrew facade up, and it's Petruchio who has shown her the softer side. And maybe that's what tamed means, is that she's not angry at the world, more she's gone away. That's one way you can interpret. You could totally do the tragic ending of she is unfortunately someone who is in a abusive relationship, who is not, and we end on a really tragic, darker note. I think it just really depends on how the director and the actress playing Catherine want to go about it. I don't think there's a straightforward yay or nay answer. I think it's a lot of gray. That just is one of the reasons why I think it's a thing that you can stage and really kind of explore with your cast, because I think that is, overall, once again, a great answer. Like, I get yay or nay.
Mariana, were you about to say something earlier? I thought I saw a hand go up.
No, it's sort of something that Monique had mentioned earlier at the beginning, about, right, there were only, I think, 3 female or female-coded speaking roles. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you start taking those away, particularly with Shakespeare's canon? I mean, just to speak from my own MFA experience, it's very recent that grad acting programs of certain grad acting programs have gender parity in their classes, and gender obviously is not on a binary, but at least for the purposes of this discussion, like people who identify as men and people who identify as women. parity, because the argument being that if you had a class that was equally men and women, the women wouldn't do anything when you had to do Shakespeare. Like Yale School of Drama 4 years ago got rid of, it used to be 10 men and 6 women because of Shakespeare. So it's really recent. Right. That like blew my mind when I was auditioning for these programs. I'm thinking, how is that possible? And so just to say, like, so what happens when you take Kate away as something to be experienced from the inside, just for the actor, and how amazing it would be to experience that journey from a kind of diminishing, like having that spark, that fire being put out, and what that means. Like that would be, I just think, an incredible experience to have, painful, but just sort of on stage from the acting perspective. That was all I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I think that would be a really interesting perspective, and I agree with Will in terms of like having it end in tragedy. To me, makes a lot more sense in 2020. Like it's tragic to me, and I wanted to point out, and I just because I don't really know where else to say it, but like my favorite quote in the play is when Kate talks about like that she has leave to speak, and speak she will. And then I wrote it down because I love it so much. And she says, my tongue will tell the anger of my heart, or else my heart concealing it will break. And it's like, that's kind of it at the end of the play. She has to conceal it, the anger of her heart. And so her heart breaks. And that's the end of the play. And then the men go, oh, what a great marriage. Hoy! Like,
at the beginning, having the actor playing Kate in disguise as one of the tricksters doing the thing, the play within a play within a play. That one of the lines in the text, it is kind of history. It is a kind of history. That's part of the framing too. Like that this happens. That this happens. Even if the play within the play within a play, we're making a frame of a thing, of a story that never happened, and make a joke of this guy, like whatever. It is a kind of history, and to then not deal with that.
All right. Well, why don't we get into this question? I'm going to let Monique start this one off of. Do Katherine and Petruchio have the best marriage in the play?
No, they don't. A follow-up question I have is, are there any portrayals of good marriage in this play? I think maybe arguably Lucentio and Bianca, maybe, because there seems to be some love there and respect, but then at the end it's like, I'm gonna call my wife, and then she's like, I'm not coming, I'm busy, and it's like, what is this weird game that we're so like, even that is like a problematic aspect of marriage. One of the things I think about Katherine and Petruchio's marriage is it's like a 1600s version of a sitcom where we see the angry man who like has this feisty wife, and he says bang zoom straight to the moon, and we go and for a lot of us, like for so long we've seen that narrative, and so it seems normal, and so we see marriages where the couples fight or are feisty or challenge each other as like, ooh, they're such an interesting and like opposites attract, and it's like, I don't think that's a real thing. I think that's a thing that we've been kind of told to believe, and aspects and plays like this, when they're played as they're written, encourage that narrative, and I think it's actually quite toxic. So I don't think they have the best marriage in the play, and I think they kind of fool us into thinking that they do, because we've now bought into that idea. That
Can I piggyback off that?
Please do.
Yeah, like I absolutely agree. I think they guise that marriage with so much comedy that it almost makes it like almost a convincing scene where it's just like, look how funny this all is, haha. And then it's very much like there's actually a lot of like horrific elements going into this right now that are completely being glossed over, which I get it's a comedy, you're treating it like a comedy, but like, wow, this is a pretty terrible scene. Like you've practically just kidnapped a woman and torn her away from her family and are dragging her into a situation that she has actively refused to want to be in. Like that, like really we're talking about like how this piece could be staged as a tragedy, like kind of elevating a couple of those elements of the piece and having Bianca have a reaction to her sister being dragged away like that really could framework a lot of the dynamics at play as Bianca moves forward in the play too, as an interesting character. I don't know, just my idea. But it's funny that you brought up the wager at the end of like the game that they're kind of playing. Like, what is that game? And you could almost see it being phrased in the modern day as being like, if we were adapting the language to the modern context, as being like, all right, boyfriends who have a partner, is like, everyone bet $20, like text your partner and see who responds first, and whoever gets the best or fastest response, wins the bet. And it's just kind of like, if we were to stage that in a modern context, even that feels like pretty weird and off base. So like, it really doesn't translate well for the modern age. You can laugh at that, and that's like, oh, like, yeah, it's part of the common talk today, especially with like dating apps and things like that, is like, are people going to respond? Aren't they going to respond? And it's just this silly dynamic, and it really does feel like a game, like an unjustified game at
that the women aren't aware of, that they don't get to play in.
Right.
They're just pieces in this game. Like, watching that last scene, I was just like, ooh, it's so like the men lounging on the pillows and they're all laughing. Like, it was so gross.
Not nice men. Nice men at all. Mariana, what do you think?
Oh, well, I would say, well, it's not marriage, it's a courtship. I mean, if we're going by what they say at the beginning, right? Like, it's a story of a courtship. It's not a story of a marriage. And there's so many other married couples in Shakespeare that we can look to for love and other things that are not loving. So I would also say, no, they do not. And like, where is marriage at all? Other than they get married, and that is a fact that occurs.
And I have to agree with everybody that no, they don't have the best marriage. Shakespeare like really kind of challenges marriage as a concept throughout his entire canon, where repeatedly marriage is not looked on as well. Like, a lot of times couples don't get married and they're happy. Like, look at Twelfth Night, where Olivia does not want to marry Sebastian. Like, she's in love with Viola, but she ends up with Sebastian because he looks like her doppelganger. Like, like Shakespeare repeated, like, every time there's a marriage or some type of loving, like Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra, where these relationships and marriage and things like that happen, it doesn't end well. Like, even in Much Ado, what's its name? When like they get up to the altar and he starts chastising her, and that awful scene that they have to do, it's like Shakespeare did not write marriage very nicely. Like, I can't think of, like, even Oberon and Titania, they don't have a happy marriage. Hermia and Lysander, I guess they kind of have a happy marriage because they love each other, actually. But like anybody else, like Shakespeare does not write happy marriages through his entire canon. Is there anybody who actually is happy? Technically, yes, you're right. They do have they're the happiest married couple there is.
Often in writing, I've read that that's the happiest married couple in Shakespeare, is the Macbeths, before she convinces him to kill everybody or kill Duncan.
Yeah.
I have an unpopular opinion.
Ooh, go.
Jeez.
Hotspur and His Way from Henry IV.
Ah, interesting.
And
Henry IV is not a play I'm very familiar with, so you'll have to excuse my lack of knowledge.
Hotspur being foil to, in Henry IV, it would be to Prince Hal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the famous, in part one, the speech, oh, go not to, right, the wife sort of saying goodbye to the husband as he leaves to go to battle, and he's like, get away from me, woman. And she's like, no, but you're my husband and I love you, and why haven't you been talking to me, and you're upset? He's like, whatever. And that's usually how I sort of see it done. Like, there's this scene before he goes off to fight and to die. Spoiler. Where it's usually, she's usually right. She's in a robe. She's woken up, and oh, what's happening, and all of those things. And I would say, actually, I mean, right, you can look at the text and that's what's happening, but there's I don't remember the lines exactly, but there's a way that they leave each other that's so painful. And when you add that to Henry IV Part 2, and he's gone, and she's talking to his father about who her husband was and the pride and the love that she has for him. I mean, sure, there's a version of it where, right, she's just the wife who's grieving and doesn't know what to do, and there's all of those things. But the best version of it that I ever saw was in a scene study class, where I saw these two actors go through it, and it was I know this is totally a tangent and beside the point. Anyway, I would put my money on them. I think there's something going on there that we don't give enough credit.
Burn his way. They best marriage out of the canon.
I was actually, if I could jump on that as well, like very similar dynamic is Macduff and Lady Macduff from Macbeth, who like very much like post Lady Macduff's death and his family's death, like we see a grieving husband and father like really falling to his knees, and like if we don't think that is a happy marriage before the Macbeths get involved with it, then I'm not sure what we're doing. And it really does. I mean, maybe leading back to Mac's point a little bit, it seems like all the happy couples in Shakespeare's canon die violent and very brutal deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Shakespeare's own experience with marriage? Question mark. Who was Shakespeare?
Him and
Poor Anne Hathaway is all I have to say.
I will say there was a great film that Kenneth Branagh just did with Judi Dench all about Shakespeare returning to Stratford after he's retired from London life, and it's a very interesting look at their marriage to each other. And yeah, no, I forget what the film is called, but it just came out. Kenneth Branagh, Judi Dench, Ian McKellen all do Shakespeare retired, basically, in the countryside. And it's a really interesting movie. But yeah, Shakespeare and marriage. Like, no, Petruchio and Katherina do not have a good marriage to each other. Like, out of all of them, no. So, yeah, there we go. All right, last question of the night. Let's do this. So, does the opening of a play within a play work, or should we just cut the thing going forward? Will, why don't you start this one?
Sure. I think thank you for letting me lead on this one. I'm referring back to a previous statement I said, which is the recontextualization into the modern day. And I think that they did that fairly well, especially like you were talking about Mariana with like the contextualization of him as like this straight white older male and his like I matter, or like my opinion matters, that type of like anger and aggression is a voice that exists within society. And I think that contextualization they brought into it is really important. And also, like, I think there is a little bit of a nuanced statement that came across in that moment, is like, well, let's convince him to entertain the idea he is part of this other world that is beyond what he is accepting of and what he's like normal of, and then and kind of him beginning to play this part. And like I really do think it says that, you know, in any kind of discourse and resolution of an issue, usually the opposition needs to play a part in conceding that they are the opposition in order to be part of the solution. And I think there is something a little bit more nuanced there, but overall is like the opening, if we're talking specifically about that part of the opening, like where it's the kind of this like interaction and convincing of you are somebody that you aren't, like I think yes, if you're recontextualizing it for a modern day and the issues at hand in our current societies, why not? I think as long as you're handling it intelligently, go ahead. It's kind of the same statement we've been echoing throughout this entire panel, I think, which is like, you can do anything you want, but why and how is the more important question. Yeah. So that's where I stand on that.
Love that. Mariana, what are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think it's so amazing that the text already has that opening in it, and we, just because it's so often it's cut, and we get straight to the sort of main plot line in the main story. And also because that introduction is the only bit of that frame that we have, like it never really pops up again. I think use it. I mean, especially if we are going to be doing the play again and we want to find ways to not just reinterpret it, but just interpret it and see what it is, then use all the bits of it. And then, right, find the things that are worth maybe excising or scooching around or doing things. It's always really fun to see interpretations on the one hand that see that the text is so primary that you get really exciting things because they are just doing the text, and you do have to grapple with those things as it stands. And then it's also just as fun to see things that are just irreverent. Like the text is the text, like just it's not alive without us doing it. And as all of you have said, Shakespeare would not have minded anachronisms at all, because none of his plays were really set when he was writing. So I'll just say the frame exists in the text already. I almost wonder why they needed to put the other thing on top of that frame already. Like maybe just use the frame. Like, we're telling the story to this guy. Who's that guy? I mean, I guess they made that whole opening to explain who that guy was. But then I think there's a shorter way of doing it, because you had 10 minutes of him screaming at everyone. Anyway.
Very funny screams, though, I have to say. I love the thing of, like, why'd you give me a Sound of Music program? Even though that's because Ben Carlson was...
That's when he said they're all sluts. That wasn't fun.
No, that was not funny. I mean, he had other funny one-liners. But yeah, Ben Carlson doing that opening random bit, and the fact they had to give him fake prosthetics to hide who he was, because if you saw him on the poster, then saw him sitting in your theater, you'd be like, why is Ben Carlson sitting in my audience and not back?
I think it is worth noting too, like in the reference point of who this guy is at the start of the play too, is that there were, in a review that I was reading of this performance, there was mention of a previous review from a blogger, as it were, an older male blogger from one of the director's previous shows, where they referred to Midsummer Night's Dream and his take on it as My Big Fat Gay Wedding. And so I think there's a bit of transference there, and then the director's kind of jabbing back a little bit, which, like, kudos. Like, that is an interesting way to bring the theater and this show into, like, a different political context. So awesome.
Yeah, wonderful. Monique, what are your thoughts on this play within a play opening? Do we need it? Should we cut it? What are your thoughts? Where are you standing?
I think it's a very weird element. I'm personally not a fan of the play within a play opening. I think it seems kind of like almost theater for young audiences, or like it seemed kind of obvious to me that it was one of Shakespeare's first plays, that I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, when I first started reading it, I was like, what the heck is going on? Who is this person? What's happening? But kind of, I agree with Will, like, in terms of, like, why are you doing it, or what are you going to say with it? I do think it was a clever attempt in it, and with what they did with it. I think they made some interesting choices. I think the casting was really cool, as having Ben Carlson, who then was later Petruchio, as the angry blogger, and then having also, I think it was really cool that Deborah Hay, playing Catherine, was the Lord or Prince or whatever that character's name is. I really liked that. I wish, kind of, I think what Mariana said earlier is, like, I wish it would have come back at the end. Like, even though I know that that's not in the text, like, in the text it never comes back, but I'm like, if you're going to make the choice to keep it in and change it to have a blogger, then, and I guess you can't, because you have your Petruchio on stage, but, like, I would have liked to see a little bit of a wrap up of that, of, like, something, even if it's just Catherine as the prince, kind of, like, coming back to whatever and being like, that now, like, what was, like, yeah, otherwise it's kind of like, what was the point other than just keeping true to the text?
You're right, it doesn't come back. Like, it's just, why is it there to begin with? Which is one of my biggest questions of, if you're going to have it, you got to do more with it than what's on the page. You got to find a way to get that thing back, because if not, the audience is going to be like, why is this, like, this is already, like, Shakespeare already gets a bad rap for being long and dry, so audiences who don't always understand the plot of Shakespeare, so to have this random play within a play opening that is not a part that comes back down the road, audiences kind of go, why is it even there to begin with? So I think if you're going to do it, you got to do it really smart. And I think if you're going to have, and I like Will's idea of going more for the tragedy of the show, I think if that's the route you're going to go, take that out at the beginning. Just jump right into the story and take that beginning intro in the play out. Like, if you're going to go tragedy route, that's the way you got to go. But if you're going to do comedy, then play with it some more. Like, do something with it. Don't just have it and then leave it, because then that just feels like unfinished work that you weren't going anywhere. Mariah, it looks like you're, like, really chomping at the bit to get in on this. I love this.
Or sort of to go to what Monique was saying, like, to have the blogger to have the blogger wake up
Mm-hmm.
and realize what he's done, because at the beginning, when I realized what was happening and that he was going to go and play Petruchio, I'm thinking, so this guy that they're playing the trick on wins at the end. Wait, like you don't get to do both of those things. Or if you do, like then have him reckon with what he's done. And that could mean, right, like having that could mean Kate having a bit more of a reduced tragic arc, or if it ends the way that it does, recognizing like the cost of what it was to get her to that place, because I mean they end basically running to their marriage bed,
Yes,
pretty explicitly. And so not only you're going from, okay, we're going to play a prank on this misogynistic joke, at the end of the play he gets laid. Like, that's not right. That shouldn't be what happens. Did I break the rules? Did we make it? Okay.
You said laid. You're good. And now I said it too. We're fine.
I agree. I also felt when I was watching it, I felt there was an element of fakeness to it felt kind of like cheating, that they had this whole start of we are players. We are putting on a play. We're putting on a play for this blogger. And then there were elements where they broke the fourth wall, where they shook a man's hand, where they had a guy in the audience pull off Tom Rooney's boot or whatever. And like, to me, those moments felt very much like, oh, don't worry about the problematic elements. We're doing a play. Like, and I was like, I'm not buying it.
I have to piggyback off that, because I think it'd be such an injustice to bring up how often this happens. Like, and I'm not sure if it happens as much in American theater where you are, Mariana, but up here in Canada, this kind of a take happens a lot. Like, we acknowledge the incorrectness of this piece, or the incorrectness of how this piece is cast. And I'm specifically thinking of a production that I know Mac and I believe Monique, you would have been privy to back at the university we all attended, trying to defer names, called Brabo's Ghost. And there was very troublesome
in that one, so I lived that show.
Brabo's Ghost has to do a lot with Indigenous stories, specifically to do with the story of the Wendigo. And there was a troublesome thing where a majority of the cast had no lineage into in any of the Indigenous colonies within Canada, and I think that was in itself like a huge misstep. And then it started with that sort of acknowledgement, like, we acknowledge who we are versus, what the play should be aiming to cast itself as, or who should maybe be cast in our spaces. But, we are doing our best to respect the roles of the pieces. But that alone, like, I don't think it's enough. And it's just, we need to do better. So these kinds of statements of like, we acknowledge how incorrect we're being, is like, then don't be incorrect. Like, do better.
Especially, I mean, that idea also sort of reminds me of Philippa Sue she was Eliza in Hamilton, and was Sonia in Great Comet and a lot of other things, and she's a Juilliard grad, so she came and talked to us my first year. And one of the things she talked about was doing Hamilton for almost a year and a half, and a lot of studies have shown that and not to be all woo-woo, like boo-hoo actors, it's so hard, but your body sometimes cannot tell that it's fake, and you will have the same hormonal responses that a real person going through the experience of your character would have, obviously to a less dramatic extent, but all of the stress hormones go off, all of the, maybe depending on like the way that you're imagining things, like romantic things, like a lot of things are happening in your body, even though your brain knows that there's this double thing happening. And so when it comes to having to embody histories of trauma or erasure over and over, particularly for actors of color or Indigenous actors, and having, not only are the stories that are told predominantly about that community's oppression, you have to live that oppression out over and over and over on stage, and likely in real life as well. And so that's sort of separate from what you were saying about the cast being not of that lineage, but just to imagine what it what it demands of someone's body and psychology to have to live through those things. And that, I mean, and then that goes to Kate, like the depending on the take, like the actor playing Kate, depending on how that goes, like there's a lot of stuff going on, and that can be little chips that happen over and over. And I think a lot about like what are the ways that, especially since the runs at Stratford are so long, like what are the things that they're doing for stamina, for health, for how do they clear out at the end of a run. I mean, right, this was a very fun production, but in the version of Shrew where maybe it took a different turn, like what would that actor's preparation be to clear out from that performance?
Do we have any more final thoughts before we wrap up tonight? Because we've almost gone 2 hours. Wonderful topic. So I don't want to cut anybody off if there's any more final thoughts we want to give. Nope.
I'm good.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you everybody for tuning in for another episode. Next time, we're going to be tackling one of Shakespeare's few sequel plays, which is The Merry Wives of Windsor. And we have 2 special guests coming on for that episode. So be sure to tune in for that because it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, Merry Wives next week. But in the meantime, if people want to get in contact with you, Monique, where can people find you? Well, like, they want to get in contact with you via Instagram, Facebook. Do you have a website? What?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. My Instagram handle is Monique4 Reels, Reals. So like Monique for Reels, and that's Instagram, Twitter. That's my Facebook page too. Like that's my handle. So.
Beauts. I love that. Mariana, where can people find you and follow all your adventures at Juilliard?
You can find me, I guess, on Instagram. My exact name, I don't know. I think it's my name is what it is. But I don't know if there's like an underscore or something.
You know what? I can pull it up and find out. Give me 2.
Should I spell it out? Would that be useful?
Probably.
I changed my name to mine.
Like, don't worry. This will all go in the description as no underscore, Mariana. It is all one word.
It's all one word. So it's my name, but with no space.
You got it. And just look in the description, everybody. It will all be down there for you to follow as well. Yeah. Will, where can people find you?
I'm gonna do what Monique did because she's smarter than I am right now. That's there we go. That's my Instagram handle. Feel free to message me on that. If you want to drop me an email, my email is will.bartley12@gmail.com. If you ever want to chat, grab a coffee virtually, I'm more than down for that. I'm always looking for cool networking opportunities and to connect with exciting people. And I just wanted to say thank you to our 2 guest panelists as well for being such amazing guests and being such exciting people to talk to. Like, very worthwhile conversation about this place. So thank you again for that.
It was so fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, this was a wonderful, absolutely terrific conversation. Thank you both for coming on. Oh, and I probably should say where people can find me too. People can find me at Mackenzie Horner at all social media platforms. Just look for the picture with the guy with the ginger hair. You can find me there. You also can listen to my podcast I do with Autumn Smith, who was on our R&J episode, where we talk all about musical theater. When this comes out, we will be coming up on our release of the musical Camelot, which I believe Marianne and I saw at Stratford that evening.
We totally did. That was so much fun.
It was a good production. We talk about it when we get into. We do talk about it in the episode. But yeah, Geraint Wayne Davies, we will be seeing next week as he is returning for the role of Falstaff. So there you go. Tie it all back there to Shakespeare in a neat little bow. But yeah, before the downbeat, look at us there, just look for Mackenzie Horner. Thank you once again, everybody, for tuning in. I thank you all. Have a great week. Cheers. And see you all next week with Merry Wives. Bye!
Bye!